Every year for Christmas, I like to make my wife a gift.
Oh my God, look at that.
Oh my gosh.
That's beautiful.
This year I decided to make a cheese board, serving tray, cutting board hybrid that has cheese knives that are actually nested and hidden within the piece. Now, this is an idea I've been kicking around for quite a while, and I think it's gonna be really awesome. The only problem is I only have 4 days to complete this in time for Christmas. I've been super busy. I have no idea how I'm gonna make it happen. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, it is day one. I have a ton of stuff to do. I need to go to the lumber yard and pick up some walnut, get that all milled up, get it glued up, and then have that ready so I can carve it tomorrow. I also think I'm gonna try to get the wooden knives today. I've got this piece of spalted maple that is amazing. I just hope I have enough time to get this all done. I decided on using walnut for this build, and I picked up this 12-inch wide, 10-quarter or roughly 2.5-inch thick board. Now, I wanted to resaw a thicker board versus buying thinner boards so I could have a book match pattern, even though on that finished piece, most folks aren't even gonna notice that it's a book match glue up, but at least it'll give me a warm fuzzy on the inside. So to do this, I cut the pieces to rough length and then split them on the bandsaw before milling on the holy trinity of woodshop tools: the joiner, the planer, and the table saw. Amen. And here I can glue up those panels. The larger panel is for the top portion of the serving board, and the smaller panel is for the piece that attaches under the serving board and hides those wooden knives. Speaking of, I'm carving the cheese knife blanks out of this piece of spalted maple, which I planed down to a tad less than 1/4 inch. I'm using the CNC to carve the knives and pretty much everything else in this project. I think anyone with a decent set of woodworking tools could recreate this build using a handheld router and some other things, and I'm considering releasing templates and plans. If that's something that you would be interested in, and if it generates enough demand, I'll do it. So let me know down in the comments if I should release those plans. I cleaned up and sanded all those pieces I just carved and cut this 1/4 inch brass rod to serve as my knife pins before calling it a night on day one. Okay, it's day two, super early in the morning, and I'm back here in the shop. I actually had to leave early last night because we went and saw the Nutcracker together as a family. It was amazing. I've got so much to get accomplished here in the shop. I've got to get the walnut out of the clamps, get that sanded down, get it on the CNC, and I'm gonna carve in a tessellation pattern. I'll explain what that is here in a little bit. And then those wooden knives are ready to assemble. So let's just get to it. The main thing I wanted to accomplish on day two was carving that tessellation pattern into the top of the serving board so I could get the epoxy poured on day two as well. I got those panel glue ups out of the clamps and then sanded up that joint to get everything even and remove any excess glue. Now I can carve that tessellation pattern, and let me take a second to explain what that is and show you all how I drew that. So a tessellation is a group of shapes that fit within each other to create a larger pattern. This pattern is just a simple circle of squares and triangles that are each turned 30 degrees to one another, and this is a pattern that I've seen elsewhere, but I wanted to draw my own vectors and be able to size those to exactly 1 inch. I just repeated that pattern to create a tessellation large enough to cover the whole board. And to carve out that pattern, I'm going to use an 1/8 inch bit that's set to cut directly on those lines that I just drew. While the CNC was working, I milled up some beech that's left over from a desk that I built a few years ago, and this is going to be my accent wood for the legs and those handle inlays. I'm sealing the surface before the epoxy pour, and while that dries, I'll carve the knife board on the CNC. To keep that glue up centered, I have to measure and set my work zero so it's half the width away from the center, so that book match pattern, that no one else is going to notice, is centered on that finished piece. This time I made sure to leave the dust shroud off so I could show those carves better. The CNC is cutting out the knife relief with a deeper pocket for the handle material, and then it cuts the circles for the magnets, and then the finger pulls, and finally the outer shape of the entire knife. The varnishes had time to dry, so I'm adding some stucco tape to the perimeter to create an epoxy dam, and then using this roller helps to seal the tape to the wood and keep it from leaking. I'm using Total Boat High Performance 2-to-1 epoxy and white pigment dispersion, and I really wanted to keep the color simple and allow the pattern to be the focus of this piece. I'm gonna pour on the epoxy across the top and then use this plastic spreader to work it down into the grooves, and this part was super satisfying, just to see that pattern kind of come to life as I would scrape the epoxy across. I ended up needing a second pour because I wanted that epoxy to sit just above the surface of the board so I could make sure there were no divots or any spots that I missed that I would then have to come and do another pour, which would add another day to the project. I can switch gears here to assembling the wooden knives with some of that 4-minute epoxy, and I tinted that black and then use those brass knife pins to hold everything together. And these knife scales are some pieces of Wenge that I had left over. Now you might recognize these from the bow tie inlays that I did on that glass river table build from a few months back. All right, let's take a minute to talk about the sponsor of today's video, and that's Truebill. Now, you guys know that I'm super busy, always working here in the shop, and I used to watch streaming services, but I really don't have time for that anymore, and I just kind of forgot about all those different subscriptions that I have that I don't use anymore. That is until I downloaded Truebill. Truebill is an all-in-one finance app that helps you save more and spend less. And it has a built-in personal finance manager that can help you manage subscriptions like maybe that old streaming service that you're still paying for that you may have forgotten about. And it can help you lower your bills and manage your credit score all in one place. And to try Truebill for yourself, just go to truebill.com/JohnnyBuilds or click the link down in the video description. And like I said, Truebill can help renegotiate your bills like your internet service provider or your credit cards simply by taking a photo and uploading it with one click. And with complete access to your credit reports and your history, Truebill can then alert you to important changes to your credit score and offer insight on how you can improve it. Again, when you're ready to try it out for free, just go to truebill.com/JohnnyBuilds or click the link down in the video description. Okay, thanks Truebill for sponsoring this video, and now back to the build. Day 3, and I'm back in the shop and happy to report that this epoxy pour came out amazing. Some of you guys may not know that I actually work a full-time day job. It's 5 p.m. and I'm in the shop and I've got a lot to do and not a whole lot of time to get it done. It's already late in the day and I'm gonna start by flattening this piece. I'm using an 1.5-inch flattening bit to plane the top of the board, and unfortunately this creates too much dust to leave that shroud off. And with that pattern cut into the top, you really can't tell this is a book match glue. You know how every project has that one thing that if you screw it up, you have to completely scrap it and start all over? That's what this next carve is. I'm actually gonna cut out the top of the cheese board, and I have to do it upside down so I can cut in those dados and those cutouts for the washers that the magnets are gonna attach to. I was so nervous to do these carves. I was super short on time, and there was gonna be no way that I could remake this in time for Christmas if anything went wrong. The crazy thing is, this took all of about 10 minutes to carve out, and I must have been on the nice list this year because these turned out perfectly. Thanks, Santa. Next up, I'm cutting out the handle inlays from that block of beechwood that I glued up earlier, and I should have given this some more tolerance because this was a really tight fit, and I even cracked the end of the handle, hammering this in place. The fit up between the inlay and the handle looked absolutely terrible, so I had to figure out a solution to fix this problem. Now, what I decided on was to carve in an outline around the handle and then pour white epoxy into that gap. I had to make a temporary spoil board from some MDF that I had, and then I carved the outline of the top of the board directly into that. Now that allows me to line the board perfectly within that outline, and then I ran an air carve just to make sure I was on track before cutting out the real thing, which took all of like 20 seconds to do. Now I'll fill that with some white epoxy and turn that defect into a design feature that looks like it was always planned, even though I totally boogered this part up. I also carved the legs from that same beechwood, and just so you all can't say that I have no actual woodworking skills, here's some fine woodworking chisel action. Okay, it is day 4, the last day of this project, and I think I'm gonna get it done. Both because I'm sitting in pretty good shape as far as everything I have left to do, and also because I don't really have a choice. I have to get this done today in order to have it ready for Katie for Christmas. Now, I have a bunch of sanding and finishing and adding the magnets on the board, but the thing that's got me the most nervous, if you will, is getting these knives all cleaned up, and I have to add a bevel, which is the thing that I'm most nervous about. Now, I've done some steel knives in the past, but I've never done a wooden knife. These are too pretty to screw up, so I wanna make sure I get it right. There was a bunch of epoxy squeeze out from that 4-minute epoxy that I used, and I figured this would be difficult to get out of all those small edges. But a sharp chisel and this little sanding stick that I made from a popsicle stick worked really well to clean this up. I cut those brass pins as close to the handles as I could, and then used my belt sander to sand those flush with those Wenge handles. Now, I knew I didn't want to use the belt sander to cut in the knife bevel, so I clamped my sander to the workbench and used it as sort of a horizontal disc sander. This isn't a normal sanding operation for me, so it took a few tries to figure out what the best way to do this, which was to sand on that back edge of the sander closest to me, which seemed really obvious after the fact. The footage is sped up a lot, but I took this part really slow. I wanted that bevel to be nice and even, but I didn't scribe in a center line, so I was just eyeballing the bevels on each side. And I'm not counting on these knives to be super sharp, but I do just want to be able to cut the cheese.
Want me to pull your finger?
Will you pulling my finger help me cut the cheese?
Back to the board, and I could sand the epoxy in the handles that had fully cured. I glued in the legs and necks, which fit way nicer compared to the handle inlays. And I'm giving the edge a super small round over, just enough to smooth out that transition from the top to the rest of the board. The serving board gets washers, which I super glued in place, and the knife block gets a set of neodymium magnets. Now, I was worried about these not being strong enough, but they were almost too strong. If I was gonna make this again, I would recess those magnets maybe about 1/16 of an inch below the surface, which should help ease that holding force just enough so it's not so difficult to pop off. Now, that said, it's super sturdy, and there's no fear of the bottom falling off, as you can see here. It just takes a bit of an extra push to separate the knife block from the top. Also, I didn't add any finger cutouts where the knives sit into the knife block because they lift out pretty easily just by pulling on the edge of those inset handles. Last, I added some Total Boat wood honey and got this all wrapped up just in time for Christmas morning. Let's go see if Katie likes it.
Oh my gosh!
Oh my gosh, look at that.
Oh my gosh! Is this for like a cheese board?
It is. These are wooden cheese knives.
Unbelievable. Are they super sharp?
No.
No, it's just for just for cutting the cheese.
This was a really fun project, but a challenging design, and I'm very happy with the end results. I'm really enjoying finding new ways to work in 3D modeling and digital design into my projects, and really having the CNC machine almost feels like a superpower when it comes to making things. I've got some really fun builds and some interesting projects coming very soon, so make sure you get subscribed to see all of that. And really hitting that subscribe button is the best way you can help my channel grow, so I thank each and every one of you for doing that. All right, thanks for checking this one out, and I'll see you back here next time.